Nikolas Badminton is a world-renowned futurist speaker, consultant, and media producer who shows you the future trends that shape impactful organizations, trillion-dollar companies, progressive governments, and $200 billion investment funds. I know he spends hundreds of hours of research to customize for each industry keynote, and he's just finishing his new book, scheduled for release early next year with Bloomsbury, titled Facing Our Futures, which equips world leaders and executives with the tools to imagine new futures, see unforeseen risks, and strengthen strategic planning. Nikolas will shift your mindset from what is, to what if, and to brighter futures. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks so much, Teresa. It's really great to be here, and thank you all for joining. It's really great to sort of step into September at the end of August and try and sort of ignite our thinking and get some of those cobwebs out as well. So as Teresa said, my name's Nikolas Badminton. I'm a futurist. I'm actually the chief futurist at Futurist.com and the Futurist think tank, and I run a think tank of about 10 internationally renowned futurists, and we work with clients all over the world to do consultancy, and I do a lot of keynotes. In fact, over the last 7 or 8 years, I've done about 300 different keynotes out there, and I sort of travel, and yes, we're back in venues now, and it's really exciting times. I do have a book coming out on February the 14th, Valentine's Day next year, called Facing Our Futures. And it is a book that looks at both positive and dystopian futures and where we might actually go so we can do more resilient planning within our organizations today. But this presentation really talks about a number of different things, and the business that I've built is around futures design and foresight. That's the ability to go deeper and to look out those 10, 20, 30, 50, even 100 plus years ahead of us, so we can gain the insights that we can take back to today, and the narratives that we imagine and explore together are really valuable in a modern business context. I always say that foresight is the missing link in modern business between strategy, execution, and the futures that lay ahead of us. And really what we have to do is start to ignite how we think about the world. Now, we do have a real challenge right now, and that's a problem with a poverty of imagination. I mean, how much do you daydream every single day? When I go and I speak to conferences of 300,000 people, I ask them to put their hands up, and it's rare that anyone in the audience really daydreams or exercises their imagination on a daily basis or even a monthly basis. It's kind of something we've lost in our childhood. But we have to reignite that, and we have to really start to explore what futures exist. You know, the possible, plausible, and probable futures ahead of us can be really valuable. In fact, they found that companies that establish capabilities around foresight and futures design generally 33% more profitable and have got a 200% larger market valuation as well. So we can see that out in the market, and the big players, you know, big tech are out there. They're sort of imagining what our futures can be. These are some of the people that I work with. And what they've really done well is they've started to really ignite curiosity within their organizations. And they've shifted that mindset from what is, you know, what's happening on a daily basis. It's incredibly important from an organizational perspective to know what we're doing, hitting our targets, and to know like the 3, 6, 12-month plan. But it's also incredibly important to wonder, what if? What if the world was going to be different? So shifting your mindset from what is to what if is incredibly valuable. And this organizational capability around foresight and futures design is becoming more essential. And the clients I've worked with over the past 2.5 years since the beginning of the pandemic have shown me that everything from high tech to agricultural firms to people working in education and beyond are really starting to tap into this kind of area. And it's busy for us, and they're hiring people that are futurists within their organizations. But what do we do as futurists and foresight practitioners? Well, we go out there and we look for what I call signals of change. These are the distinct things that indicate that something is changing in our world, in our industrial complex, and that we have to pay attention. We might find these signals in academia, it might be in the press, it might be in the R&D rooms that we have within our organizations. But the really most potent forms of signals out there are cultural and societal signals that show that humanity as a whole is starting to shift the trajectory towards a future horizon. Now, we have to tap into this, but we can't predict anything, and futurists do not predict. So if you're chatting to any futurists and they're like, oh, I predict this by this date, I predict that by that date, then they're not really doing the work that we have to do in serious futures design. And the work really is about speculation. So I speculate on how the world might change, and really that's valuable because we can explore without boundaries what might happen, what might come next. And all the way through workshops and keynotes, and I play games, mobile games as part of my keynotes as well. We start to explore what those scenarios and what those situations and narratives could actually look like. But we live in serious times, and we know this. And one of the most important things that I do talk about is megatrends. These are the big world-changing effects that we have to all be aware of. Every company I chat to are affected by the water, energy, food nexus. There's an interrelation between all of these, and we're starting to see this in the news every day. Many clients have ignored this, or they've sort of called foul of any talk of climate change. It's like, can you take that out of the keynotes? Well, yeah, sure. We don't have to put it in the keynotes anymore. We're surrounded by, droughts and challenges with water, energy, and food. In fact, there's this relation. I talk about the water, energy, food nexus. A shortage and scarcity of water is going to affect, 35% of food production by 2100. Reduced legumes, reduced vegetable growth, and we're going to need 60% more food at that point in time. So now's the time to get serious about looking at water resiliency, but also around energy, even closer than 2100 at 2030. We're going to see water scarcity affecting 98% of the world's energy production. So the future is kind of playing out, and it's playing out much earlier than we thought in the world. Some of the work I did over the past couple of years, it's starting to really gain traction today. And these are challenging times. So, it's time to be serious, but it's time to explore and have fun with ideas of how we can address these things. There's another thing that we need to be considerate of as well, is waste. Earlier this year, I flew down to Scottsdale. I presented to Waste Management, to their executive forum down there. And it's fascinating to see that the industrial complex that we've been living in for the past 300 or so years is inextricably linked to the culture of waste. In fact, the mass of waste plastic in the world today, it weighs heavier than all the living mammals that actually walk the earth today. So that's kind of scary. So we really have to get a grip on all of these things. I also talk about the megatrends around multi-generational trauma and mental health and the challenges there. And that links really closely into what's happening with our increasingly online, hybridized, offline and online hybrid work culture that's happening right now. We're seeing a lot of companies giving entire companies a week or two off a time, and it's mostly because they haven't done a good job of helping their employees become resilient myself. And what's interesting with this, resiliency is a really important subject when we talk about futures as well. But we're really good at looking at positive futures. In fact, we see politicians do it every day. We see tech companies going out there and saying that this trend and that trend is going to be the future. Artificial intelligence, the metaverse, data analytics, search, virtual reality headsets, self-driving cars, Elon Musk's Starlink, all of these things. This is the future of this, and this is the future of that. And wow, that bright future is fantastic. But we've not been very good at keeping an eye on how the world is working in terms of what could go wrong. These short-term decisions can sometimes have effects that ring out through generations. So the book that I've written, Facing Our Futures, it offers a positive dystopian framework, and that you can actually explore positive and dystopian trajectories of futures and the signals and the trends and the scenarios within there. So we can really build that resilient planning capability within the business. And the most important thing is to anticipate the risks that are ahead of us that may be, starting to come into view, but may also not be seen at this point as well. What can we imagine might come next. And it's really interesting when we start to think about the positives and the negatives, because that holistic view really is a game changer. And that's really sort of the crux of what I talk about in Facing Our Futures. I talk about how it's difficult for us as humans to look into the dark. I talk about all sorts of bias that stops us from doing that. I also talk about how we can take steps forward to address that and be brave and have hope as we step towards our futures. But part of this, and a really important part of this, and the keynotes that I do and the work that I do, it includes stories. Not only stories of what's happening today with incredible innovators and people coming up with new solutions and new ways of working, but also stories that we can imagine ourselves in and our customers and the people in our society in as well. These raw, visceral stories really make things come to life. And if we can write a story of the year 2080, 2100, and we can start to put the people in context of, new agricultural practices or new mega cities or, living on the moon or living on Mars or interplanetary travel, whatever, we can start to really understand the thoughts and feelings and culture that seeps out from those futures, because that's just as important as the technology that comes out of that as well. And the stories lead us to really question, what is normal and what is not normal, and what is the past and what is the future. Now, I talk about post-normal futures, and I talk about how the world is going to change. So post-normality is kind of this strange liminal place between our past and our future. So we kind of worry about, where we go, what we do, what decisions we're making today, and sometimes we feel helpless. So when I work with audiences to talk about futures, and I do interactive play and all sorts of fun activities and conference, and I work with clients in the context of the boardroom or within large training environments that they want to teach their people how to do foresight and futures design, I really help them try to explore some of the knowns and unknowns. There's something called the Johari window that helps us really understand what unknowns are and what known unknowns are. So, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone says, here comes a black swan. We could never have seen a global pandemic come. Well, that's not true. We've seen pandemics happen over the centuries. I mean, we even had the Hong Kong flu, which was a pandemic in the late 60s. The Woodstock Festival happened at the same time. We even had places like the Wimbledon tennis tournament taking out pandemic insurance after the SARS outbreak happened in the 90s. They'll never get that insurance again, but they certainly got a good payoff, and they spent a ton of money. They spent millions of dollars every single year to protect against pandemics. We haven't been good. We've had our eyes shut. It wasn't an unknown unknown. It was a known unknown. We know that they're out there. We just don't know when it's coming. And with about 7 million coronaviruses out in the world, in the animal population, zoonotic viruses can jump from animals to humans, and we might see something more challenging coming in our future. So now's the time to get ready. I'm sorry to break that news to you. And I officially became like the worst person to talk to at the beginning of the pandemic, because the work I did with some of my clients pretty much played out most of the events that have been happening for the past 18 months. Everything from January the 6th, insurrection in Capitol Hill down in Washington, D.C., all the way through to wars that are raging today. But this post-normality is really interesting. The known unknowns are the things that futures design helps us to really explore, around water resiliency, energy blackouts, a whole bunch of different things. How are we going to build a society that's going to survive? Humanity will survive, but we have to choose how we do that. And to do that, we have to have futures design in our world. In fact, futures design is incredibly essential. And that's it. I mean, really what we are is shifting those mindsets from what is to what if. I mean, this short presentation today is really just a taster of what I talk about. When I do talk to industries, we go into specifics around data and devices, interconnection. We talk about history, but we talk about the futures that lay ahead of us. I share examples of stories and videos and speculative futures in the worlds that we can imagine. I really challenge you to wake up every day and challenge your own thinking and say, what if things worked differently in my life, but also in my business? What if, consumers change? What if the products we offer become no longer relevant? What if we invest more in R&D? What if we establish futures design in our organization? And what if we step forward with hope and not worry about what we're going to do for the next quarter, the next 6 months, 18 months, and the such like? So shifting your mindset from what is to what if is incredibly important, because the curiosity leads to speculation. That speculation leads to stories, and these stories about our futures really help us understand where we're likely to go and what happens next. And I sort of cut it a little shorter than 20 minutes for my presentation there, Teresa, but I'd love to take any questions that people have right now.
Thank you, Nick. I mean, even in that short bit, I've got a whole page of notes that I've taken. So you've certainly got my wheels turning, and hopefully that of our audience. And yes, we're happy to take a couple questions and delve in a bit deeper here. So I will just have a quick look at what we've got. I know there's questions about the new workplace, and can you offer any insights in terms of the trends that you're seeing about, I don't know, what do you sense will become the most common version of the new workplace or the hybrid design?
Yeah, I see tons of colleagues out there, and it's like, let's talk about quiet quitting and the great resignation and all of these things. And I don't think it's that simple. I think we've forgotten that humanity is really resilient. Societally, we want to be together. In fact, when I did the Future Events keynote, I shared a vision and a video of Stonehenge. And in Stonehenge in the UK, near where I grew up, people have been meeting there for tens of thousands of years, and there have been dozens and dozens of pandemics, and it hasn't stopped people from getting together. Yes, it's a challenge sometimes to get people together, to make people feel comfortable when maybe you've got respiratory viruses floating around, but like we still need to do it. We still need to go to events. The special things happen when you're in a room with people. The mirror neurons fire. So when I think about the future of work, I do think that there is going to be hybrid work. I do think that some people are going to work from home, they're going to work in the office. I like to talk about a 3-2 rhythm. 3 days in the office where you're collaborative and you do all that good creative thinking and collaboration, and 2 days at home where you're being hyper focused and productive. Well, we certainly hope so anyway, right? So when we think about work, be careful of all these buzzwords and whatever. It's great to think about, resignations and whatever, but there's some truths. People are tired. People are burnt out. It's time to look inward at your organization, but it's also time to start looking about what you stand for. And really what I tell people is, if you don't know what you're going to stand for the next 50 or 100 years, do you know what you stand for today at all? So that's where futures work actually goes hand in hand with all kinds of different planning tools, like, brand planning and Steep and Pestle and all this stuff as well, that you typically find within organizations. Having some kind of an idea of the story that you're going to tell over the years is really important. And we do see some companies that are trying to do that out there. And, who would have thought we'd be landing rockets and driving electric vehicles as much as we are today? But someone like Elon Musk, I'm afraid I have to say his name, but, someone like him was talking about this 20 years ago, right? So have these bigger visions. You're going to see the word future laid out in more manifestos in companies from this point forward. And really, we have to realize that we've all got a part in shaping what that looks like.
Fantastic. Thank you. We've got a number of other questions in. A question about what or in what industries do you see some of the biggest opportunities are post-pandemic?
Well, post-pandemic, I mean, I really think healthcare. I think that mental health is not just big opportunities. It's like essential work needs to be done when it comes to the mental health of humans. I did a study at the beginning of the pandemic. Well, we didn't know. I didn't imagine the pandemic was going to hit us hard. So myself and my colleague Nick Black from Intentions out of Vancouver, British Columbia, we did a study. We looked at the future of Americans and the future of Canadians, and we looked at everything from like work stress and digital usage and whatever. And we found that people were more stressed, depressed, and anxious than ever before they were more narcissistic. And this is pre-pandemic. So let's just hypothesize that they're even more stressed and depressed and anxious, and that they're even more narcissistic. There's a lot of work to do. So the biggest opportunities, I think, is one, look inwards, look at yourself and take time and be kind to yourself. I've certainly had some very, very tough times. I bought a house and had a baby and did all sorts of things in the pandemic. I even acquired Futurist.com, and, I run my business on my own, and I've got great partners. But hey, the stress has come. There's time to relax. There's time to unwind. Therapy is incredibly important. Friends and talking is incredibly important. So, but I do think out there in the world, I think that people are looking very seriously at mental health. They're certainly looking at healthcare and how that's changing. But yeah, all the other systems sort of come second to that. But lots of opportunities in finance and reimagining experience, reimagining work, reimagining what people actually care about. And I think the pandemic really made people stop and reflect. And whilst a lot of people are just leaving to be on sabbaticals and don't want to work much anymore, it's not because they hate their jobs or they hate work. It's just that they need to work out who they are and where they want to go in their lives.
Thank you. And you touched in that answer about what's happening worldwide and globally. And there's a question about trends on a global scale, wondering on a global scale, how do you think different countries or regions compare in terms of how they address megatrends? And are there countries that we could be learning more from?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've got a huge dynamic happening, obviously, with Ukraine. And the Russia conflict and war in Ukraine is starting to show us some of those supply chains around the world have been challenged, and the pandemic and a number of other things as well. I mean, waterways for taking ships up and down Europe. Well, there's no water in the rivers. China's got the biggest drought it's ever had. There are some of these big challenges. There are a few places that I look to for indications of big changes. The big countries, China, India. I think Africa as a continent is incredibly important to look at. Africa by 2100 is going to have 8 out of the 10 largest cities in the world. They think Lagos, Nigeria is going to be 88 million people. One city, 88 million people by the year 2100. And that's from data from the United Nations and the Global Cities Institute here at the University of Toronto. So, look to Africa, look to India. India is going to be the most populous country. And wow, there is really a whole range of societal and cultural and class issues there that are going to indicate, how resilient systems are. China is that totalitarian push forward into, adopt or die. We're going to see a lot of changes around energy, around food, around water, as I said. We're going to see global interconnectedness, and we're going to see how things are changing. I think that the power that North America and Europe have had for so long is waning. I think the next 50 years is going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen. There's a lot of infighting. I think there needs to be a lot of coming together and working together that needs to happen. And you know what? We also need to work together with the countries that may have been challenging to work together with before.
Thank you. You gave us a few tools to use in having this kind of mindset, including the asking what if as a question. Yeah. And then, as you mentioned, the Johari window, looking at the knowns and the unknowns. There's another question about a way to look at this from Carolina is asking about blind spots. Do you have a sense of 1 to 3 of the biggest things coming our way that we're blind to at the moment, besides the looming recession?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The news in the past few months have really started to show us all the blind spots that we've been ignoring. And I've already mentioned many of these, water, energy, food, mental health, everything is starting to come down. This is what we call in the futures design world collapse. We're either continuing on a path and doing well, we're either finding our limits in discipline, we're either collapsing, and we're starting to see systems really struggle out there. And there's a point where we have to really work out how we're going to transform. Yes, it takes investment. Yes, it takes work, but we have to transform out of finding our limits and discipline before we hit the collapse. It's difficult to come out of a situation that's failing. I mean, we see down in Mississippi, there's an entire city who has to turn off their water supply now, and they just can't fix it. We saw that in Flint, Michigan. This is the world that you drive through as you go through America or whatever. It's absolutely scary. We've still got, you know, in northern Canada, we've had pandemics up there with pneumonia and with all sorts of respiratory diseases in indigenous communities for the last 50 years. There are so many blind spots in our world. You know, the black elephants, the known unknowns are the most important things that we have to really pay attention to. The book that I've written is about looking for those blind spots, because it's great to say positive futures, but if we don't understand what could go wrong, and it might be down to regulation and infrastructure, it might be down to societal pushback, then I think we're missing part of the puzzle. So yeah, there are plenty of blind spots out there. I mean, this is the work we do. When I work with specific companies, we look at their business model, we look at the work they do, their performance, where they want to go, and then we start to consider, you know, the immediate parts of their business. So if I work with a high-tech company, I look at systems and platforms and data and whatever. And then you start to look at, you know, the internet connectedness. You start to look at humanity's usage of technology. You start to look at bias that lives in data. You start to look at bias that lives in society. And it's a cascade. So once you start, you kind of can't stop. Now, I sort of live in a world where I try and be hopeful, but I also, you know, stand on the precipice looking at so many existential crises that are potentially coming that it can be kind of harrowing at the same time. So you have to breathe through it and take a brave step forward.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. I'm going to take this one from Diane, which is about the acceleration of changes. So she references COVID accelerated changes. And as we come through the harshness of the initial COVID situation and get to a new normal, how can government, industry, and people in general keep this mindset of finding quicker solutions to problems? Her fear is that decision makers will fall back into a slower reaction mindset.
Do you know what? That's absolutely fantastic. How quickly did retailers like work out that they could do curbside pickups? Now, it's one of the biggest examples at the beginning of the pandemic. It's like, oh no, our economy and you know, its fiscal health is based on people buying stuff. Oh no, people can't walk into stores buying stuff. We're going to fix that. And they made decisions quickly. I think there's been a huge wake up call in business. I think people can make decisions quickly. I think that people are scared. They're cowed by stats and fear of losing their jobs. I always think that the organizations almost need to give their departments a wild card, which is like, I've got an idea, I think it's going to work, and I think we can do it quickly. Let us experiment. In fact, you know, I've done that in advertising agencies. I worked with a company in the early 2000s where the founder who exited the business as the sole owner for like $1.4 billion, he said, if you've got an idea, build it. Let's do it. The average age of the company was 26. And this is the year 2000. We'd go home and we'd build analytical models and new ways of looking at the world, new tech systems. And you know what? Within 2 or 3 weeks, they were in the product. You know, that was a long time ago. But why have so many companies been slow? Everyone's risk averse. But they're risk averse because their clients are risk averse. Why are they risk averse? They don't want to waste money. Well, we have to basically apportion a little bit of our budget so that we do waste it and experiment. And do you know what? After some time, we're going to find something that's gold, and all that money is going to be paid back and everything's going to be great. Facebook used to say, you know, move fast and break things. It's not really like that anymore. It's about being responsible. It's about thinking differently. It's about taking a step forward. It's about facing what's happening in our futures and starting to realize that the solutions can exist today and that we need to implement them.
Wonderful. You've given us lots to think about and strategies to work with to bring back to our organizations and just our own mindset. I want to say thank you so much, Nick, for helping us face our future with both a what if possibility mindset, but also a probability mindset so that we can move forward thoughtfully. And I do want to share, I noticed a comment from Donna in the audience who says, my favorite line today is to step forward with hope. And she would add the word intentionally, step forward with hope intentionally.
Absolutely. We are hope engineers. So let's move forward.
Yes. Thank you again. And thanks to our audience for joining us today and for your engagement in the program. We will have a video available for a limited time post-event that we will send to you in our follow-up email, and hope you've been able to have some takeaways from Nick's presentation and really think about what benefit he could bring to your organization, we'd be happy to help you do that. We will be here every 2 weeks with a strong fall program to help you continue to move forward personally and professionally into the fall and next year. Thanks again and take care.